Building a family can be a complicated, messy, lonely, and sometimes heartbreaking process. But you don't have to navigate this challenging journey alone.
Welcome to the All Paths podcast, where we support and celebrate all of the different ways there are to try to grow your family. We are your hosts, Kate and Emily from the nonprofit organization All Paths Family Building. And today we're talking with Alexis Eiler about her journey and work in this space. Alexis, thank you for joining us on the podcast today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
Thank you. So will you introduce yourself for our listeners to get us started today?
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Alexis Eiler. I am the executive director of On Your Feet Foundation. I've been with the organization for coming up on 10 years. We are based out of Evanston, Illinois, although we work across the US and Canada. And I come from a background of marketing and business development and finance and nonprofit work. I have degrees in French and psychology and organizational psychology, and just finished up my coursework at the University of Illinois for my master's in social work.
Oh, that's awesome. Congratulations.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, like last week. I don't know what to do with all this extra time.
Congratulations. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Do you have a graduation ceremony?
So the way U of I works is you have to do all of your coursework and then you move into your internship. So now technically I move into my internship or field placement. That is just a huge project with my current work of launching our PMAD, postpartum mood and anxiety disorder assessment tool. And we're also adding in a group practice so that we'll be able to provide counseling and therapeutic services directly. So we'll start contracting with therapists who have adoption competency. And so that is my huge internship project over the next few months.
That sounds spectacular. And I'm glad you get to do it as part of your current work. You don't have to have this like side hustle at the same time.
I don't know how I would do that, but yeah, so it was great. U of I has been great to work with and really flexible. So it's been a great experience.
Well, that's wonderful. So can you share a bit about On Your Feet Foundation, what you do?
Yeah.
We jumped ahead to like some of the exciting things that you have in the works, but yeah, I'd love to get to know your work a little bit better.
Absolutely. So On Your Feet was founded in 2001. So we are coming up on 25 years, and which is super exciting. We were founded by adoption professionals, adoptive parent and birth parent who, at that point in time really saw the need for post-placement services for birth parents. Nothing had really existed in the past. There were a couple of things here and there, but, especially with open adoption really starting to be considered best practice in the 90s, there was a real need for this and it wasn't being addressed. And so we started out kind of doing light case management. They would do what they called gap grants. So really small amounts of money, maybe $50 here, $100 there, for books, for a college class or a GED or transportation to get to a job or to school, that kind of thing. And then we, a few years later, started offering retreats. And those were started by a couple of our birth parents. And so all of our retreats have always been peer led, and which is really cool. Over the last 20 years, we're one of the only organizations that has offered retreats that consistently and also being completely peer led. So we were doing that. In COVID in 2020, we were trying to figure out, what we were going to do. We couldn't meet with people in person. We had been up to that point only working in Illinois and Indiana. And we all came together and said, well, with what's going on right now in the world and COVID and, just the fear and the unknown, we decided to launch virtual support groups. And it was kind of funny because it was something that we'd been talking about doing for a long time, but we were overthinking it. I think were thinking, we need to have all of this infrastructure built around doing these support groups. And then COVID hit and we said, we just need to do it. And so we started doing it, and we were offering 3 support groups a week. And that was obviously not sustainable. So we got into about June of 2020 and realized that this wasn't going away. And the support groups were being well received and people were attending them. And so we took a step back and said, okay, how do we do this in a way that's sustainable? And so we started we built programming around the support groups. We scaled them back. So now we do about, kind of depending on the month, we do about 4 support groups a month and 4 or 5 support groups a month. And every month has a different theme. So it might be navigating grief, it might be learning to say no, it might be finances. How do you navigate social media responsibly? So it really runs the gamut. And we take feedback from our birth parents to kind of say, what is it that what would resonate with you? What do you feel you can benefit from? And we have birth parents now who attend just for the content. We also host drop-in calls where there's no, sort of scheduled agenda. And we have a support group just for birth parents who placed and closed adoptions or who are now in reunion. So we built out that whole support group program. And in doing so, we also just opened up all of our services to anyone anywhere in the US and Canada. So we have birth parents coming to us, I believe right now from 46 states and several provinces in Canada who are joining regularly.
Wonderful.
And we reach over about 800 birth parents are connecting with us in some way, shape, or form annually. We run a mentorship program. We do a holiday assistance program. It's the only one that we've encountered that provides gifts not just for the children that somebody is parenting, but also the children that they placed. So we will, we'll send up to 4 gifts per birth parent who applies. And we do all the shopping and everything in-house. So we
Oh,
just kind of
wow.
divide and conquer. Yeah.
Well, that's
Yeah, but
probably
it's fun.
fun, but it's a lot of work. Yeah.
It's a lot of work,
Yeah.
and but we just, I'll buy gift cards and then share them with my staff, and then they go and they do the shopping. And
That's really cool.
yeah, it's really neat. We have our Create Arts grant, so that is for a birth parent who is doing something in the art space. And that for most of our winners have been writing books. Our most recent winner last year ran a uh, arts therapeutic art class online, and I believe we had about 8 birth parents attend, and so 4 sessions doing different projects, different mediums. So that was really neat.
That's amazing. Well, much of what you said certainly resonates with us. I mean, we also, prior to the pandemic, had mostly in person. Peer-led support
Yeah,
groups until the pandemic. But then we pivoted completely to virtual. And also prior to that, because they were in person, they were very centrally located in New England in our case. And then the ability to broaden it to anyone who needed it once they were virtual has been really great. But I know it's a lot of work too. But we're big believers in peer-led support for sure.
yes,
It's so wonderful to have people that can relate to your specific journey.
yeah,
And then also just I'm so grateful that your organization is so focused on the needs of birth parents. I think the emotional needs of any part of the adoption constellation, I think, is lacking, even though I think most people can understand that it's a very complex life experience to go through. But I still think there's a lot of things that are important that our society hasn't caught up to providing.
right.
But the birth parents' needs specifically, I feel like are too often just an afterthought. And that I think some view them as like a means to an end instead of
Mhm.
such obviously an important personal part of this experience. So can you tell us a little bit about why that was the focus of the organization and how that came to be?
I think it really came down to everything you just said, which is there was in adoption in the US historically, right? We had maternity homes, we had the girl, we have the girls who went away. We have all of these stories. I guess also in Ireland, there was a lot of where that came out of. But so we had historically told women who got pregnant and were sent away were forced to give up their children, that they were to just do that and never ever speak or think of their child again. Uh, and so society was able to just kind of turn away. We also demonized birth parents, right? And we said that, they were unwed, they, had had sex out of wedlock, didn't, they were drug addicts, they were uneducated. I mean, just all of these stigmas and stereotypes that we assigned to birth parents, which was really, a societal way of saying we're going to say that you're really a bad person and that's why you ended up in this mess, to make ourselves feel better about the fact that we were taking a child away from someone, rather than building societal supports and social welfare supports into, you know into our, governmental systems, into our societal systems, to say, hey, rather than demonizing someone who finds themselves in a crisis pregnancy for whatever reason, why don't we make it possible for them to parent? But, you're looking at the power structure. We talk about white saviorism. You can look going back to slavery and family separation. So, there are all these pieces of our history that brought that kind of forced us to ignore, or encouraged us to ignore, birth parents, to say that they weren't worthy of support. But then once we started opening adoptions and saying, oh, actually the best practice in adoption is for children to know where they came from and to know their biological family, we started to realize that, oh, maybe we need to actually provide some support for birth parents, and stop treating them like, the dregs of society, and also treating them as, a commodity, a means to an end. We need children because, and especially coming out of World War II, you have the baby scoop era. White couples should be able to have children. And if they can't biologically have their own children, then they should be able to adopt. And we're gonna give them the power and prioritize their needs over the needs of anybody else. So that's where, I think that that's where it's all kind of come out of. And when you look at open adoption, we demonize birth parents, but then we expect them to show up in healthy ways for their child. And if you're not giving them the tools and resources to do that, well, what do you think is going to happen?
Mm. Thank you for sharing a lot of the historical context around adoptions, particularly in this country. I'm really glad that we're finally getting to a place where we recognize that everyone involved deserves support. But definitely unfortunate that the years and years and years and decades of trauma and mistreatment got us here.
Yeah, there are absolutely ways to do it better. And we are seeing that. We are seeing those efforts being made, and we are seeing change. It's, of course, not happening fast enough. It never does. And we also believe, I personally believe, and organizationally, we believe that adoption will always be a necessary resource for some people. But when you look at the outcomes in adoption, when you look at the outcomes for adopted people and the outcomes for birth parents, we really need to do better. When you look at overrepresentation in the criminal justice system, overrepresentation in referrals for mental health and behavioral disorders, suicide, substance use, all of these things, when you look at adopted people and birth parents, their rates are so much higher than the general population. And so adoption isn't solving a problem, it's creating a new problem. And so we just need to be able to look at adoption holistically and parenting holistically, and and ensure that people who are in a place where they can parent have the resources to do so, and the people who really can't, we're providing them with the resources that they need in order to get into a place where they are healthy and where they can show up for their child, their adopted child, in healthy ways.
I love that. That's very well said. So do you, as an org, support, I mean, primarily birth parents? Do you have resources for adopted people? Do you have resources for people who are thinking about adopting or who have adopted?
So our case management staff works with even, our birth parents who are parenting as well. So we will work to provide resources for birth parents who are parenting other children. And a lot of our birth parents are, I'd say it's at least around half of our birth parents are parenting children. And so we do provide resources for them. I mean, I've had case managers walk a birth parent to a Head Start program to get their child signed up. We have worked with birth parents whose children who have Child Protective Services involvement to help them get a child back out of foster care. So we do that with our birth parents for adopted people and for adoptive families and families that are hoping to adopt. Really, where the core of our resources are is in our adoption education piece, which is activism and adoption. And so what activism and adoption, we started it was a terrible idea for a fundraiser back in 2020. I'm pretty sure we lost money on it. But what came out of it was this amazing space. We did about 5 sessions, and we realized that we had hit on a need, which was adoptee and birth parent centered adoption education. So much adoption education is really driven by adoptive parents and adoption professionals. And what we need to be doing is listening to the lived experiences of the people most impacted in adoption, being the adopted person and their birth parents. And so we do about 10 sessions a year. And they are just really incredible because we look at adoption as, just like, anything in life, right? We're constantly learning. So much adoption education, the way that it's put out there into the world is that your adoption education ends when you've adopted your child. But that's really where it's just beginning. And so that's the position that we've taken. And so when we run our sessions, we have people from all corners of the adoption constellation. And that makes for really amazing discussions with our speakers. And we get I just think you get so much more out of it when you're able to, be in that space with people, with birth parents, with hopeful adoptive parents, with adopted people, and adoption professionals who are all coming together in this space to have these conversations. And so that's really where the core of our resources, I would say, are for people who are not birth parents who are looking for resources. But I will also say that in doing the work that we do with our birth parents, we are improving outcomes for the entire adoption constellation. So it's indirect, but there's this ripple effect.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I'm curious, what appealed to you about this role when you were, looking for a position? Not to sound like I'm interviewing you for it, but what appealed to you about it? And then like sort of what is the most rewarding to you about it? You mentioned how you're almost in your role for 10 years, which is wonderful. And like what are like the most meaningful moments for you in general?
You're going to get a very strange, brutally honest answer from me. I had been in the for-profit space for my entire career, up until about 10 years ago, and really had always wanted to be in the nonprofit space. But honestly, every single time I applied for a job, I was told I was overqualified for whatever the role was, but yet, I was underqualified for a role that people can, that vicious cycle of job searching. And I was actually supposed to go, I had found a job and was supposed to go become the development director at a nonprofit music school in Chicago. And I have a music background as well. And so, the job blew up. The whole thing fell apart. And all of a sudden I was closing a business that I had owned, and I didn't have a job lined up, and I was just really frustrated. And a mentor of mine who had run a local organization for many years, and whose board I had served on, called me up that day and said, I have a job for you. And, they really need someone with your skill set. They're trying to grow the organization. They're trying to increase its visibility. They're trying to increase, just become a more professional, cohesive, present organization. And so I interviewed and I took the job. And I had had some experience in adoption. I had worked during college whenever I was home on breaks. I had worked at the Cradle in their infant nursery. So that was a really interesting experience in adoption. We cared for infants who were awaiting placement or whose parents were trying to decide whether they could parent or not. A lot of our infants had drug exposure or some other congenital issue that, their parents felt that they couldn't parent them. And so there were a number of times where I placed an infant in their new adoptive family's arms. There were times when I placed an infant in the arms of their biological parents because they were taking them home. And so with that, I mean, it did it over the course of 4 years, but somewhat limited experience in adoption. I don't know, this role just fascinated me because even in that role, even though I had had contact with people who were going to become birth parents, we never talked about it. It was this strange place, this and the nurses that I worked with. And we were just there. We were there to care for the babies. But so it was this interesting, when I was approached with this position, oh yeah, this is really cool because in my experience, we never talked about the birth parents. So over the course of the last 10 years, obviously I'm still here. So I became really passionate about it and decided, to go back and get my MSW and really be able to come to this work in a very informed way, really understanding the history of adoption in the United States and, what has gotten us here and what resources are available for birth parents and, what resources aren't being provided, why agencies really aren't the best place to provide those resources post-placement, really starting to understand trauma and history and the importance of, for a child to have that biological connection with their parents and, really kind of drilling into, scientifically what we know about what is best for our children.
That's great. Well, it sounds like you definitely ended up in the
Yeah.
right place for you. It's like sometimes we do something like that, like you said, on your breaks from college, and you're not even sure that it's gonna turn into anything relevant in your future, but then
Yeah.
in a strange way, the universe has you come full circle in some way.
It does. I am not a big believer in fate. I wouldn't describe myself that way. And I do believe that things, though, have a way of happening for a reason. And, with that job at the Cradle, I knew the director of the nursery at the time. And she had kids the ages of my sisters. And I babysat for them sometime. And, I had graduated from high school, was looking for a summer job. And I called her up and I asked if I could volunteer.
Mm-hmm.
And the Cradle was always known to have this waiting list for what they called cuddlers. Just people would come in and hold the babies.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, well, there's a wait list that's, months and months long. It doesn't, but I could hire you.
Well, I will be submitting my resignation and applying to be a paid cuddler.
I saw Kate's eyes light up.
Well, and
Forget
unfortunately,
it. I'm out of here.
the Cradle is closed. I think their nursery closed last month, maybe. I know they made an announcement that they were closing it.
Oh, no.
Oh, that's too bad. Well, it's a
Yeah.
long commute for me to go cuddle in Chicago anyway, but maybe there's a paid cuddler position around here. Yeah, I'm leaving. Sorry, Emily. Bye.
That's not even funny.
So maybe you did touch on this, but it sounds like your work is very much focused on meeting the birth parent where they are in terms of what they need. So, it sounds like deciding what to do about their, potentially putting their child up for adoption is part of it for some people, it sounds like, but it doesn't seem like your organization is pushing one decision or another or one option or another, but just making sure the birth parent is supported in that journey wherever it takes them and wherever kind of twists and turns the road takes. Am I hearing you correctly, or is that an accurate depiction? Or do you feel like your organization is sort of trying to emphasize supporting them in parenting that child so that maybe they don't put them up for adoption?
So that is a common misconception about what we do at On Your Feet. And part of that, again, is the language that we use in adoption. So when you look at adoption agencies, a lot of adoption agencies will refer to a birth parent as someone who is an expectant parent at the time, who is considering adoption. And so, we conflate this language, and it's interesting because it is part of sort of that power dynamic in adoption. By telling somebody that they are a birth parent, you're automatically swaying them, right? Because they start already thinking of themselves as a birth parent rather than saying you're an expectant parent. Let's figure out if parenting is really, the right thing for you. And there are a handful of agencies that do that truly do options counseling. What we do, and we are really, really careful about this, and it's sometimes frustrating and heartbreaking, is we only work with birth parents. We work with individuals who have placed their child for adoption. Now, laws vary from state to state. We really try to ensure that we are not working with somebody who is still in the revocation period. So we really truly want to make sure that if a birth parent is coming to us, they are a birth parent. They are not getting, they have made that decision and that decision is final. So that we are able to stay neutral in the adoption space. That has kind of evolved over time for us as an organization. When I first came to the organization, what I was told was we don't take a position on adoption. We are all really, our board and our staff are really on the same page now. As it's not so much that we don't take a position on adoption, it's that we never want to influence somebody's decision to parent or to place. So even if one of our birth parents comes to us and is pregnant and is considering placing again, we will not work with them on that decision. We will provide resources to them. We will be very careful that the resources we actually kind of try to provide access to a resource that's kind of a middleman, to essentially say, look, we aren't going to push you to an agency. We're not going to endorse any agencies and say, these are good people to work with. What we're going to say is, why don't you really explore your options? If a birth parent comes to us pregnant and says, I really want to parent, we are absolutely going to work with them to find resources to ensure that they can.
So it sounds like all of your specific resources are for post placement.
Yeah, we really want to be careful about that. And, and there are rumors and spaces that I've come across that we funnel birth parents or expectant parents to agencies. We have never, ever, ever done that. We wouldn't. It's a violation of our mission. We want birth parents. And the reason is that we want birth parents to be able to come to us and know that this is a neutral, safe space where we are, because one of the risks that, so with adoption agencies who provide post-placement services, right, that's great. But the thing for birth parents is that you've got a few issues. One, just returning to a place of trauma where, the case manager helped facilitate them relinquishing their parental rights is something that people just don't want to do. You don't want to go back to that place where something terrible happened to you. Two, there is a lot of just kind of concern that if they get pregnant again, they'll be coerced into placing again.
So given that there are almost too many cooks in the kitchen with their own agendas and you're trying to stay neutral but provide that service, do you have any recommendations or kind of guidelines for potential adoptive parents in terms of like, what are some things to look for if you choose to work with an agency, or what are some red flags that, should start you questioning how this whole process is being facilitated?
Absolutely. We have actually there's a blog post which I can share with you, and it goes up on our social media periodically. There's a nice little PDF that is a list of questions that prospective adoptive families should be asking agencies. And there are, red flags. If an agency is moving an expectant parent out of state, that's a real big one, and that's one that we see a lot of. So there are a number of different questions that people should be asking agencies. What kind of post-placement services are offered? Just really kind of looking at how an agency works with an expectant parent and ensuring that they are doing everything above board and really kind of meeting the highest of ethical standards. And I think as an adoptive parent, when your agency has done that, when you can ask them, if my child's adoption happens to be a closed adoption and my child turns 18 and wants to connect with their birth parents, what kind of resources are you going to provide then? Are you going to be here with me the entire way? Or is this just a financial transaction?
Thank you for sharing that. For anybody listening who might be looking for that sort of resource, we will put the link to that post specifically in the show notes, in addition to kind of all of your general links. Are these resources, these questions, this information for prospective adoptive families, is that all covered in the Activism and Adoption program?
It is. So that's a lot of what we're talking about. And so our activism and adoption is we started out with kind of three pillars, being race, relationships, and resilience. And obviously there's a lot that kind of crosses all three. But we talk a lot about all of these various issues. Most of our sessions are with either adopted people or birth parents or a combination. We have a handful of sessions that include adoptive parents, and there's one with one of our case managers, Katie Finn, really kind of talking about the power dynamics in adoption. She's one of our case managers. She's often an adoptive parent in transracial adoptions. And so, really talking about that, we talk a lot in transracial adoption about social and cultural mirrors. It is true in transracial adoption. It's very visible, right? A white family adopts a Black child. There's a lot of cultural differences there. But it's true really anywhere. You think about, I've had conversations with people who are adopted who then have their own child, and their child was the first person they have ever seen who looks like them, and the impact that has. So, we really, and again, this is going back to, we feel that adoption education begins when you've adopted your child, not ends, because you have to think about all of these different things that happen as you hit different milestones, as your child hits different milestones in their lives. And so we talk a lot about honesty. We talk about, navigating and connecting, looking at adoption as, you're not just adopting a child, you're really approaching family in a different way, because you're gaining your child's whole biological family. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you're now having Thanksgiving together, but it does mean that you have to see these people as an extension of your family. And I think when you can start sort of reframing how we think of family and how we think of adoption, it becomes easier in a way, because you start to understand and see the challenges that come with that. And then once you have that knowledge, you can work on that. You can work with that, right?
Yeah, I think preparing for them as much as you can and making plans and being mindful of the different components. I think just then anything that comes sort of out of the blue, startles you, is so much harder than, as much as you can, being planful and mindful is work, and time well spent.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's great. That's great. Well, I'm so glad that we're connected to you and that we have gotten a chance to learn more about your work and your own shift into this work from other fields. It's really so wonderful to learn about it and to know that this exists for birth parents and just families in general who are building their families this way.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. We're always happy to be able to chat with other organizations doing good work and ensuring that people know that this resource is out here, no matter where you sit in the adoption constellation.
Now, I know you touched on it at the beginning when we were talking about your
Mhm.
MSW. So, what are the two big projects that are in the near future for On Your Feet?
So we are working with Maureen Fura, who is the founder of Mammha, Mammha. And Mammha is a web-based app that assesses individuals for postpartum mood and anxiety disorders. So is I'm sure that you're aware this is a huge issue, right, in the US. And the rates of diagnosis for insured women is something like, I think it's 1 in 5 women struggle with PMAD. And this is just talking insured women, and you may want to fact check me on that number because I've the numbers change and I've looked at so many different numbers that sometimes they get muddled in my head. But the point is, it's underdiagnosed and it's undertreated, and it is a $14.2 billion economic problem in the United States. So if you can't get people just on the, we should ensure that people have the resources they need so that their mental health is
Basic humanity piece. Yeah.
right. If we can't get people there, then I feel like I'll throw in the economic component of this is a multi-billion-dollar problem in the United States, and what that means is people who are undiagnosed and untreated for PMAD um, can't show up to work, they can't care for their children, they can't support their families, and so we need to address this for birth parents. So PMAD, and this is something that I think people know intuitively, but they don't really think about it until you point it out. PMAD is assessed by a pediatrician. And so birth parents don't see a pediatrician because they don't have their child. And that means that the rate of diagnoses for birth parents for PMAD is extraordinarily low. We don't have data on it. And so this is where we're stepping in. So we are working to take this app and actually strip it of everything that is, because this is the other issue with these resources, is they are designed for people who are parenting, who have their child. So we are taking it and stripping it of everything that references parenting, and we will use it as a diagnostic tool for our birth parents. And then the other piece of that is that we are becoming a group practice. So On Your Feet is adding to everything else we're already doing. We're not taking anything away. Our case management staff is going to kind of shift a little bit. A lot of their work right now is researching therapists and finding therapists. So this is actually going to just be a shift in their role to working directly with birth parents.
It'll hopefully make it easier for them.
Yes, that is the plan. And then we will have therapists contracted with us who have both the ability to treat PMAD and have an adoption competency. And so we'll be also able to provide direct service, hopefully from, just a financial perspective. It will help us be as an organization, because what we do right now is we do provide access to counseling, but it's all outsourced, and we are giving our birth parents who don't have insurance that will cover mental health resources, we're paying out of pocket from us for their counseling sessions. So what we do right now is we do $500 grants. We have negotiated sliding fee scales with our approved therapists who, are really just generous and wonderful people who work with us on these obscenely low rates considering what you pay for therapy these days. And then so that gets our birth parents about 10 sessions. And then those grants are renewable. But by kind of flipping this, we're not paying out of pocket for therapy anymore because we'll start working to bill insurance. And so the therapist gets paid more. We, are actually creating something that's sustainable because right now we're 100% funded by private donations. And then our birth parents will also just have therapy for as long as they need it. So PMAD is it takes on average about 13 sessions to effectively treat. We anticipate that people who are struggling with PMAD and there's, crisis pregnancy trauma component to it will take longer, but we'll be able to offer that for as long as it's necessary.
Oh, that's really wonderful. I mean, not to say that everything you're already doing isn't wonderful, but
Yeah.
that'll be a really great addition to your programming.
It's the other piece that I think we've needed for a long time.
Yeah. So, Alexis, it's been really great getting to learn more about the work that you do, but we do have two final questions for you. And you can kind of tailor them specifically through, your lens looking at working with the adoption constellation, or, if you have more general thoughts that you want to apply, you can do those as well. So I'm going to share what both those questions are, and then you can kind of decide what order you want to answer them in. And the first is, what is one thing that you would say to someone who is just starting to grow their family? And then the flip side is, what is one thing you wish people would stop saying to people who are struggling, whether that is the person struggling to build their family, or in your particular community, if it's what do you wish people would stop saying to birth parents?
Both really fantastic questions. So, I think for the first one, as I think back to friends who I've spoken with who are, maybe struggling with fertility or, just kind of trying to figure out how they're going to build their families, patience and do your research, and I think not having set expectations, not letting what other people have done or what other people are saying to you, whether it's, your mother-in-law who's like, when are you going to make me a grandmother? Or whatever it may be. That this is your decision and your space and your choice of how you want to go about creating a family or not. And to do what's best for you and your partner or you on your own. That societal and this kind of goes, I think, into the answer for the second question. I think we need to reframe societal expectations of family. And this, I think, rings true, not just in adoption, as I touched on, of, when you adopt, you're not just getting this blank slate. This child has a history, they have a biological family, and the best outcomes in adoption happen when you're able to acknowledge that family and build them in and accept them. I, talk a lot about just, well, we talk about it and talking about power and also in talking about love. It's not a finite resource. And so I think just kind of taking a step back and taking an approach that's maybe a little more holistic and sheds societal expectations. For birth parents, I think what I hear from our birth parents most is telling them they did an amazing thing, calling them heroes, calling them courageous. I think that that's the other piece of it is that we have to stop assigning emotions to people, stop assigning titles to people. It goes on both sides, right? We demonize birth parents, but we also tell them how, courageous and heroes and same with, adopted people, right? You have Angela Tucker's book. You should be grateful. So I think it's a long-winded way around just saying you have to do what's best for you. And if you're approaching adoption, you need to approach it with, I mean, as with anything else, you need to approach it with eyes wide open and really do the research and really educate yourself and really shed those societal stigmas and expectations and stereotypes and make a decision that makes the most sense for your family.
I love that so much. The stop assigning emotions to people, it can work for a variety of situations, not just this particular one.
Right. Ask open-ended questions.
Very wise.
Not closed-ended questions.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Alexis, for coming in talking with us today. It's been so lovely getting to know you and your work. And like I said, said this like 3 times now. We'll put all of your links in the show notes in case anybody listening is interested in learning more.
Perfect.
Well, nice to meet you, and thank you so much.
Yeah, nice meeting you, Kate. And Emily, nice to see you again, and thank you.
We hope you'll join us next time for more family building stories and resources. Be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts to make sure you never miss an episode. And follow us on social media at allpathsfb or visit our website, allpathsfb.org, for more information about our work. All Paths Family Building is so grateful to the members of our circle of support who are vital to our ability to provide emotional support, education, and advocacy that is open to anyone struggling to grow their families. Today, we want to give a special thank you to our bronze sponsor, Boston IVF. Thank you for joining us for this episode. Please help spread the word so that anyone who is struggling to grow their family can join the conversation. It's an honor to walk with you on your family building journey.